There is a quiet truth that follows every human being from the moment of birth, yet most spend their entire lives trying not to look at it. It does not shout, it does not demand attention, and yet it never leaves. That truth is aging. We see it in others long before we are willing to see it in ourselves. We notice the wrinkles on someone else's face, the slowing of their steps, the fading strength in their hands. But when it comes to our own body, our own life, something in the mind hesitates. It whispers, "Not yet, not me, not now." And so we turn away. We distract ourselves. We fill our days with activity, entertainment, ambition, anything to avoid looking directly at what is already happening. But the Dhamma invites us to do something radically different. It does not ask us to escape aging, nor to decorate it, nor to deny it. It asks us to see it clearly, directly, without illusion. Aging is not a mistake in the system of life. It is not a punishment, not a personal failure, not something that has gone wrong. It is simply the natural unfolding of conditions. Just as a leaf, once formed, must eventually change color and fall, this body, once born, must inevitably move toward decline. This is not philosophy. This is not belief. This is observation. And yet, suffering arises. Not because aging exists, but because the mind resists it. We have been conditioned, deeply and subtly, to associate value with youth. Youth is praised, admired, pursued. It is linked with beauty, strength, possibility. Aging, on the other hand, is often hidden, softened, or even feared. Entire industries are built on delaying its appearance, masking its signs, pretending it can be controlled. But no matter how refined the effort, the underlying truth remains untouched. Because aging is not happening to us. Aging is what this process is. If we look carefully, we begin to see that what we call my life is not a fixed entity moving through time, but a continuous flow of change. The body is not the same as it was 10 years ago. Not even the same as it was yesterday. Cells arise and pass away. Sensations shift moment by moment. Energy rises and falls. Even the mind, thoughts, emotions, perceptions, is in constant movement. This is what the Dhamma points to when it speaks of impermanence, not as an abstract concept, but as a living reality. Aging is not something that begins at a certain age. It is happening now. It has always been happening. From the first breath, the process has already begun. So why do we struggle to accept it? Because somewhere deep within, there is an assumption. This should not be happening to me. A subtle belief in stability, in continuity, in control. We build an identity around who we think we are, our appearance, our abilities, our roles, and when aging begins to challenge that image, the mind reacts. It feels threatened. It tightens. It resists. And in that resistance, suffering is born. But imagine for a moment what happens if we stop resisting. Not in resignation, not in defeat, but in understanding. What if we begin to observe aging not as a problem, but as a process? Not as an enemy, but as a teacher? We might start to notice small things. The slight change in energy in the morning. The way the body responds differently to effort. The subtle shifts in the face, in the posture, in the senses. And instead of turning away, we stay. We observe. We acknowledge. This too is part of the nature of life. In doing so, something remarkable begins to happen. The fear starts to soften. The urgency to hold on begins to loosen. There is a quiet clarity that emerges, not because aging has stopped, but because the mind is no longer fighting against it. This clarity is the beginning of wisdom. To see aging clearly is to see beyond the illusion of permanence. It is to recognize that nothing we experience can be held on to, not even the body we call mine. And while this may sound unsettling at first, it carries within it a profound freedom. Because if nothing can be held, then nothing needs to be defended. If everything is changing, then there is nothing fixed to lose. This is not a cold or detached understanding. It is deeply human. It opens the door to compassion, for ourselves and for others. Because when we truly see aging, we realize that everyone is in the same process. Every person we meet, every face we recognize, is moving along this same path. There is no exception. And in that realization, something softens in the heart. We become less harsh, less demanding, less attached to how things should be, more willing to accept, to understand, to be present with what is. Aging, then, is no longer something to fear. It becomes something to learn from. It becomes a mirror, reflecting the truth of existence. A gentle but persistent reminder that life is not meant to be controlled, but to be understood. And this understanding begins with a simple, but profound shift, from denial to seeing. Not turning away, but turning toward. Not resisting, but observing. Not asking, "Why is this happening to me?" but seeing, "This is the nature of all conditioned things." When that shift happens, even slightly, the entire experience of aging begins to change. What once felt like loss begins to reveal itself as truth. What once felt like threat becomes a doorway, to clarity, to acceptance, and ultimately to peace. And this is where the path begins. As we continue to look more deeply into the process of aging, something becomes increasingly undeniable. The body does not remain as it once was. What once felt effortless now requires energy. What once responded quickly now hesitates. Strength fades, senses dull, recovery slows. And for many, this phase brings with it a quiet but persistent discomfort, a sense that something is being lost, something is slipping away. At first, the mind interprets this as a problem. It asks, "Why is my body failing me?" It compares the present with the past and concludes that something has gone wrong. There is frustration, sometimes even resentment, as if the body were supposed to obey us, to remain stable, to preserve the version of ourselves that we have grown attached to. But the Dhamma offers a very different perspective, one that does not deny the experience of decline, but completely transforms how we understand it. What if the body is not failing us at all? What if it has never belonged to us in the way we imagine? From the moment this body came into being, it has always been subject to conditions. It depends on food, on temperature, on rest, on countless biological processes that operate far beyond our control. The heart beats without permission. Cells divide and decay without consultation. Aging unfolds without asking whether we are ready. And yet, despite all this, the mind quietly claims ownership. This is my body. This assumption is rarely questioned, until the body begins to change in ways we cannot control. Then suddenly, the illusion becomes visible. Because if it were truly mine, why can I not command it to remain young? Why can I not instruct it to heal instantly, to stay strong, to never grow weak? The truth begins to reveal itself not through theory, but through direct experience. This body does not obey. It follows its own nature. And that nature is change. When seen through the lens of the Dhamma, the breakdown of the body is not an error, it is a revelation. It shows us, with increasing clarity, that what we have been identifying with is not stable, not permanent, not self. Every ache, every limitation, every moment of fatigue becomes a quiet teaching. This is not yours to control. At first, this can feel unsettling. The mind is not accustomed to letting go of ownership. It wants to hold on, to fix, to reverse. It searches for solutions, treatments, improvements, and while there is nothing wrong with caring for the body, suffering begins when we expect the body to be something it cannot be. Because no matter how much effort is applied, the direction of the body remains the same. It ages. It changes. It declines. But within this very process lies an extraordinary opportunity, if we are willing to look at it differently. Instead of seeing the body as an enemy that is betraying us, we can begin to see it as a teacher that is revealing truth. Not through words, but through direct, undeniable experience. When the body is strong, it is easy to believe in control. It is easy to assume continuity. But when the body weakens, it exposes the fragile nature of those assumptions. It shows us that what we relied on was never solid to begin with. And in that exposure, wisdom has a chance to arise. Imagine observing the body not with frustration, but with curiosity. Not with resistance, but with awareness. A pain arises. Can it be seen simply as a sensation, changing moment by moment? Fatigue appears. Can it be acknowledged without immediately turning it into my problem? The senses fade. Can this be understood as part of a natural process, rather than a personal loss? This is where the practice becomes real. Because the Dhamma is not asking us to think differently, it is inviting us to see differently. To see that the body is not a fixed object, but a flow of conditions. To see that what we call decline is simply the continuation of change. To see that attachment to form, to strength, to youth, is what creates the feeling of loss. Without that attachment, what remains? There is still sensation. There is still experience. But there is less struggle, less resistance, less suffering. This does not mean the body suddenly becomes comfortable or easy. Pain may still arise. Limitations may still exist. But the relationship to these experiences begins to shift. Instead of being trapped in them, the mind starts to observe them. And in that observation, there is space. Space between sensation and reaction. Space between change and resistance. Space where understanding can grow. This is the beginning of freedom, not freedom from the body, but freedom within the experience of the body. Because when we stop demanding that the body be something it cannot be, we release ourselves from a constant conflict. We no longer measure our worth by physical ability. We no longer define ourselves by appearance or strength. We begin to see the body as it truly is, a temporary formation, arising from causes, subject to conditions, and destined to pass. And strangely, in that recognition, there can be a sense of peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is understood. The aging body, with all its changes and limitations, becomes a doorway, a way of seeing more deeply into the nature of existence. It strips away illusion. It removes false certainty. It brings us closer to reality than we have ever been. And if we allow it, it can guide us toward a profound shift, from identification to observation, from ownership to understanding, from resistance to acceptance. The body is not the obstacle on the path. It is the path itself. Every change, every discomfort, every moment of weakness is an invitation to look more closely, to let go more deeply, to understand more clearly. And when that invitation is accepted, something remarkable happens. What once felt like breakdown begins to reveal itself as truth. What once felt like loss begins to uncover wisdom. And what once felt like an enemy becomes, quietly and patiently, one of our greatest teachers. As the body slowly changes, another dimension of aging begins to reveal itself, quieter, less visible, but often far more powerful. This is the aging of the mind. And unlike the body, whose decline can be observed with relative clarity, the movements of the mind are subtle, complex, and deeply conditioned. For many, this stage becomes the most challenging. Memories begin to fade or blur. Names are forgotten. Moments slip away more easily than before. The mind, once sharp and reliable, may feel uncertain, scattered, or slow. And along with these changes, something else often arises: fear. Fear of losing oneself. Because for most of life, identity has been built not only on the body, but on memory, on continuity. On the sense of, I am the same person I have always been. But when memory weakens, when thoughts become less predictable, this sense of identity begins to tremble. The mind quietly asks, if I can no longer remember clearly, if I can no longer think as before, then who am I? This question is rarely spoken out loud, but it is deeply felt. And here, once again, the Dhamma offers not comfort in the conventional sense, but something far more transformative: clarity. Because what is being revealed in this stage is not a malfunction of the mind, but its true nature. The mind has never been stable. It has never been fixed, never been a solid entity that remains unchanged. Even in youth, thoughts arise and pass. Emotions come and go. Perceptions shift from moment to moment. What we call memory is not a permanent storage, but a fragile reconstruction, constantly changing, constantly reassembled. But in earlier stages of life, this instability is hidden by speed and continuity. The mind moves quickly, smoothly, giving the illusion of consistency. It feels like me. It feels reliable. And so, we build our sense of self upon it. But as aging progresses, this illusion begins to crack. The slowing down of thought, the gaps in memory, the unpredictability of attention, all of these begin to expose what was always true. The mind is not something we own, not something we control, not something we can rely on as a permanent foundation. And again, the first reaction is often resistance. There may be frustration. Why can't I think like I used to? There may be embarrassment. Others will see that I am not the same. There may be regret. I should have done more when I had the chance. And beneath all of this, a deeper unease, the fear of losing control, the fear of dissolution. But the Dhamma invites us to look even here, even in this uncertainty, with a different kind of attention. Because within the aging mind, two very different paths can unfold. One path is untrained, reactive, and conditioned by habit. On this path, the mind clings to the past, replaying memories, holding on to identities, comparing what was with what is. It resists change, fears loss, and becomes entangled in worry, regret, or bitterness. The more it clings, the more it suffers. And as the mind becomes less stable, this suffering can intensify. But there is another path. A path of awareness. A path where the mind, instead of grasping at its own content, begins to observe it. Where thoughts are not taken as truth, but seen as events. Where memory is not clung to as identity, but recognized as a function, imperfect, changing, not self. This path does not depend on having a perfect memory or a sharp intellect. It depends on something far simpler, yet far more profound, the ability to be aware of what is happening, as it is happening. This is what is meant by sati, mindfulness in its deepest sense. Not merely paying attention, but remembering to observe. Remembering to stay present. Remembering not to be lost in the stories the mind creates. Even when the mind forgets many things, it can still remember this, to know what is happening now. A thought arises, can it be known simply as a thought? Confusion appears, can it be recognized without panic? A moment of forgetfulness occurs, can it be met with patience instead of fear? In this way, the very instability of the mind becomes part of the practice. Because each moment of uncertainty is an opportunity to let go of the need for certainty. Each moment of forgetting is an invitation to release the illusion of continuity. Each moment of mental change points directly to a deeper truth. There is no fixed self behind these processes. And rather than leading to despair, this realization can lead to freedom. Because if the mind is not me, then its changes are not a personal failure. If thoughts are not mine, then their fading is not a loss of identity. If memory is not self, then its imperfection is not something to fear. What remains, then, is awareness itself. Not as an object, not as something owned, but as a simple knowing, a clarity that does not depend on the content of the mind. And this is where wisdom begins to emerge. Not as accumulated knowledge, not as intellectual sharpness, but as direct understanding. Understanding that everything arising in the mind is conditioned, temporary, and not self. Understanding that clinging to any of it leads to suffering. Understanding that letting go brings peace. This kind of wisdom does not decline with age. In fact, it can deepen. Because as the distractions of life begin to fall away, as the mind is no longer occupied with endless planning, striving, and becoming, there is space. Space to observe, space to understand, space to rest in awareness. And in that space, something very quiet, very steady, can begin to grow. A calm that is not dependent on circumstances. A clarity that is not dependent on memory. A peace that is not dependent on control. This is the potential of the aging mind, not to deteriorate into confusion, but to awaken into understanding. But this potential is not automatic. It depends on practice. It depends on whether the mind has been trained to observe or conditioned to cling. It depends on whether we have learned to let go, or spent a lifetime holding on. And this is why the Dhamma is so urgent, so relevant, not just at the end of life, but throughout it. Because the habits we cultivate now will shape the way the mind meets aging. If we practice awareness, patience, and letting go, then even as the mind changes, there will be a foundation of clarity. But if the mind is filled with attachment, resistance, and identification, then aging can become a source of deep suffering. So the question is not whether the mind will change. It will. The question is, how will we meet that change? With fear or with understanding? With resistance or with awareness? Because in the end, aging does not take away the possibility of peace. It reveals whether we have discovered it. As life moves closer to its final chapters, something subtle but profound begins to shift. What once felt essential slowly reveals itself to be optional. What once seemed worth holding on to at all costs begins to feel heavy, even burdensome. And yet, the habit of holding on does not disappear easily. The mind, conditioned over decades, still reaches, still grasps, still tries to secure something stable in a world that has never offered stability. This is where one of the deepest teachings of the Dhamma quietly emerges, not as a concept to understand, but as a reality to live. The art of letting go. For most of life, we are trained to accumulate. We gather knowledge, relationships, achievements, possessions, identities. We build a sense of self out of these layers, and over time, they begin to feel inseparable from who we are. To let go of them, even slightly, can feel like losing a part of ourselves. But as aging unfolds, life itself begins the process of release. Roles begin to fade. Responsibilities shift or disappear. The body no longer supports the same activities. Social circles change. Even the way others perceive us begins to transform. Without asking for permission, life gently, but firmly, starts to take things away. And in response, the mind often tightens. It clings more strongly to what remains. It tries to preserve identity. I am still this kind of person. I still matter in this way. It holds onto memories, replaying them as a way of maintaining continuity. It reaches for control, even when control is no longer possible. But this tightening does not bring dignity. It brings tension. It brings fear. It brings a quiet struggle against the natural flow of life. Because dignity, in the deepest sense, is not about maintaining control. It is not about appearing strong, independent, or unchanged. These are surface definitions shaped by social expectations. True dignity, as revealed through the Dhamma, arises from something far more subtle and far more powerful, inner freedom. And inner freedom comes not from holding on, but from letting go. Letting go does not mean abandoning life. It does not mean becoming indifferent or withdrawn. It means releasing the unnecessary burden of clinging. It means allowing things to change without insisting that they remain the same. It means meeting each moment without the demand that it fulfill our expectations. This process can begin with small observations. A memory arises. Can it be appreciated without needing to relive it? A role fades. Can it be acknowledged without trying to reclaim it? A relationship changes. Can there still be care without possession? Gradually, the practice deepens. We begin to see that much of our suffering does not come from what is happening, but from our insistence that it should be otherwise. The mind says, "This should not be ending. This should not be changing. I should still be who I was." And in that resistance, there is pain. But when that insistence softens, even slightly, something opens. There is a lightness that begins to appear. Because letting go is not a loss, it is a release. It is the dropping of weight we have carried for so long that we no longer noticed it. The weight of identity. The weight of expectation. The weight of control. And as these begin to fall away, what remains is not emptiness in a negative sense, but space. A quiet, open space in which life can be experienced more directly, more simply, more peacefully. This is why letting go is the highest form of dignity in the final stage of life. Not because it looks impressive from the outside, but because it transforms the inner experience completely. A person who is letting go does not struggle against change. They move with it. They do not cling to who they were. They rest in what is. They do not demand that life conform to their desires. They understand its nature. And in that understanding there is grace. Not the grace of youth or physical beauty, but the grace of acceptance. The grace of a mind that is no longer at war with reality. This kind of dignity cannot be given by others. It cannot be maintained through effort or performance. It arises naturally when the mind releases its grip. And yet, letting go is not a single act. It is a gradual unfolding. There may still be moments of attachment, moments of fear, moments of hesitation. The mind may reach out again and again. But each time it does, there is an opportunity to see clearly. This too is a form of clinging. And in that seeing, there is the possibility of release. Even letting go itself must eventually be let go of. Because the deepest freedom is not found in trying to achieve a state, but in the complete absence of grasping. At this stage of life, this practice becomes not only meaningful, but essential. Because everything that can be held will eventually be taken. The body will weaken. The mind will change. Relationships will shift. Possessions will be left behind. Even the sense of I that we have carefully constructed will begin to dissolve. And if we have not learned to let go, this process can feel like being stripped away, piece by piece. But if we have practiced letting go, even a little, then this same process becomes something entirely different. It becomes a gentle release. A gradual unburdening. A quiet return to simplicity. There is nothing to defend, nothing to preserve, nothing to carry forward. Only the present moment, as it is. And in that simplicity, there is a profound peace. This is the paradox of the Dhamma, that by letting go of everything we thought we needed, we discover that we are no longer bound by anything at all. And this freedom, this quiet, unshakable ease, is the true dignity of aging. Not found in what we keep, but in what we are finally able to release. As the journey of aging unfolds to its final horizon, there is one truth that can no longer be kept at a distance. It is the one reality that quietly accompanies every breath, every step, every passing year. But now, it begins to come into full view. Death is not approaching from somewhere else. It has always been here, woven into the very fabric of life. And yet, for most of our lives, we treat death as something distant, something abstract, something that happens to others. We speak of it in hushed tones, avoid thinking about it directly, or push it into the background of awareness. The mind says, there is still time, not now, later. But aging dissolves that illusion. With each passing year, the sense of distance begins to fade. The body reminds us. The mind reminds us. The world around us reflects it. People we once knew begin to disappear. Moments become more precious. Time feels less abundant. And at some point, whether we are ready or not, a deeper question begins to arise. How will I meet the end of this life? This question is not meant to create fear. It is meant to awaken clarity. Because from the perspective of the Dhamma, death is not an isolated event. It is not a sudden interruption of life. It is the natural continuation of a process that has been unfolding from the very beginning. Just as aging is the gradual transformation of the body and mind, death is simply the final moment in that continuum. But what gives that final moment its significance is not the event itself. It is the state of the mind that meets it. At the edge of life, when the body can no longer support us, when external control falls away, when everything familiar begins to dissolve. There is only one thing that remains as the ground of experience: the mind. Not as an idea, not as a concept, but as a living process, responding, reacting, or resting in clarity. And this is where everything we have practiced, everything we have cultivated, reveals its true value. Because in that final moment, we cannot rely on strength. We cannot rely on possessions. We cannot rely on status, relationships, or achievements. All of these belong to the world that is being left behind. What remains is the habit of the mind. If the mind has been trained in grasping, it will grasp. If it has been conditioned by fear, it will fear. If it has spent a lifetime resisting change, it will struggle as everything changes at once. But if the mind has learned to observe, if it has practiced letting go, if it has cultivated clarity and understanding, then even in that final moment, there can be peace. Not because death is pleasant, but because it is understood. This is why preparation for death is not something that begins at the end of life. It begins now. It begins in the way we meet each moment. The way we respond to change. The way we relate to impermanence, not as a threat but as a teacher. Each breath that arises and passes away is a small reflection of the final breath. Each moment of letting go is a rehearsal for the ultimate release. Each act of awareness strengthens the mind's ability to remain clear, even when conditions are unstable. This is not a morbid perspective. It is a deeply liberating one. Because when we bring death into awareness, not as fear, but as truth, it changes how we live. It cuts through trivial concerns. It softens unnecessary conflicts. It reveals what truly matters. And what matters is not how long we live, but how clearly we see. Not how much we accumulate, but how deeply we understand. Not how tightly we hold on, but how gracefully we can let go. As the end of life approaches, the practice becomes very simple, yet very profound. To be aware of the present moment. To observe the body as it is. To notice the mind without becoming entangled in it. To allow thoughts, sensations, and emotions to arise and pass without clinging. Even something as simple as the breath becomes a powerful anchor. The gentle knowing of inhalation and exhalation, again and again, brings the mind back to what is real, what is immediate, what is actually happening. And in that simplicity, there is stability. Not the stability of permanence, but the stability of awareness. Because while everything else is changing, awareness can remain clear, if it has been cultivated. At the edge of life, this clarity is the greatest support. It allows the mind to meet the unknown without panic. To face the dissolution of the body without confusion. To experience the final letting go not as a loss, but as the natural completion of a process. And in that moment, something very quiet, very profound, can emerge. A stillness that is not dependent on conditions. A peace that does not need anything to continue. A clarity that sees without distortion. This is not something mystical or distant. It is the natural result of understanding. But without preparation, without practice, the mind may not recognize this possibility. It may be overwhelmed by habit, by fear, by confusion. And so the opportunity for peace may be missed. That is why the Dhamma speaks with urgency, not to create pressure, but to remind us that time is uncertain. Not in a dramatic sense, but in a simple, undeniable way, every moment that passes does not return. And yet, within each of these moments lies the possibility of awakening. The possibility of seeing clearly. The possibility of freeing the mind from its own entanglement. So when we reflect on death, we are not looking toward an ending with dread. We are looking toward a truth that gives meaning to the present. Because the way we age is the way we die. And the way we die reflects the way we have lived. If we have lived in distraction, we may meet death in confusion. If we have lived in clinging, we may meet death in fear. But if we have lived with awareness, with understanding, with the gradual practice of letting go, then death is no longer something to be feared. It becomes a final moment of truth. A moment where the mind reveals its true nature. And if that nature has been cultivated well, then even at the edge of life, there can be clarity. There can be peace. And there can be a quiet, unshakable dignity in the final letting go.